This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
And actually, that was what was causing some of the failure modes because, the debris left behind by the cockroaches is very acidic, and it would actually eat through the PC board traces. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, we were repairing these things for over a year and really never had a problem with the keyboard. And all of a sudden, we're starting to get this rash of defective 800s with spacebar problems. I think it was like a Friday afternoon. We got a call from Atari California, and my manager came in saying, you need to get the modem going, and they're going to download this file. And we complete the download, and it was basically a beta copy of the Pac-Man cartridge. And so for the next 2 hours, I think 4 or 5 of us were sitting around computers playing the beta copy of the Pac-Man cartridge. But I was actually a support engineer for a commercial, Atari 8-bit computer commercial.
This is Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Lou Massucci was a bench technician for the Atari 800 line, repairing 8-bit computers and peripherals in Somerset, New Jersey. Later, he was promoted to field service representative for the Southwest Territory. Check the show notes at AtariPodcast.com for really cool photos of the Atari commercial that Lou helped with, plus modern pictures of Lou with his Atari Service Mug. This interview was conducted March 2nd, 2015. I had, not too long ago, talked with your friend Michael Phillips.
Yes, we worked together. That's how I met Mike Phillips at Atari.
Why don't you start by telling me the story? How you got hired, how you met Michael?
Actually, the way I got hired at Atari is rather interesting. When I was, I guess I'm trying to figure my age out now. I guess I was about, it was 1978 when we bought a 2600. I have 2 sisters younger than me, and that was our first game system. And, we kind of like went through the early cartridges that came with it, like the Pong and the Tank Battle, and pretty much got bored with it after about the first 6 months. And then I guess it was about it was a winter, like around January or February of 1981. I believe the first arcade translation of Space Invaders came out for the 2600. And my younger sister said, and to back up a bit, our game platform, the 2600 console, had it broke. And it was the problem where you probably heard of this, where basically the trigger button just fires continuously. Mm-hmm. And it was like the left side. So because the machine basically got relegated to the closet for that summer, and then came the January when that game cartridge came out for Space Invaders. My sister was like hounding me to get the console fixed because she wanted to get that game on her Christmas list, and she needed to have the console working again.
Which game was it?
It was Space Invaders for the 2600.
Right. Yeah.
So I was working in New Jersey at this electronic company that makes power line disturbance analyzers, and I was a repair technician there. And interestingly enough, their stuff is CPU based, and it was running off of the 6502. So nearby, the Atari repair center was about maybe 10 miles away. So during lunch one day from work, I took the 2600 game console and brought it into the Atari Service Center for repair. And while I was there dropping it off, I happened to remember that Atari had introduced their 8-bit computer systems, the 800 and the 400, because I was receiving literature from Atari in the mail. Mm. And I just happened to ask if they were repairing that product at that facility. And they said, well, we haven't started yet, but we will. In fact, there's people in from California this week interviewing for those positions. So the light went on in my head, and I said, I need to come back here tomorrow with a resume. So the next day I went back again at lunch, dropped off my resume. 2 days later, I got a phone call to come in for an interview. About a day or two later, came in for the interview, and about a day or two after that, I found out that I got the job offer, and I accepted it. And that was like around November of '81. So I started right away. and it was me and one other person that were working in, excuse me, working in the new facility that was repairing the 8-bit computers, the computer systems and the peripherals. Started out working there, and about a few months later, I don't remember exactly when, excuse me, but a few months later, they merged the game repair center with the home computer repair center, and we basically all became one. And that's actually when I met Mike Phillips. So I was working with.
So this was in Somerset, New Jersey.
This was in Somerset, New Jersey, and we actually moved to a brand new facility when they did the merge. We moved to a brand new facility in Somerset, and we basically had, it was one big lab. It's kind of funny. It was one big lab that one side was the technicians for the 8-bit systems, and the other side were the technicians for the game systems. And so the technicians were kind of a separate team. But we kind of started mingling and getting along really well. And it was a very young group of people, which was kind of interesting. It's probably the only job I've ever worked for where probably the oldest person in the building was probably only in their early 30s, and they were that was management. Most of us technicians were in our early to mid 20s. In fact, some of them probably were just about 18 or 19 years old. So it was kind of interesting. It was a fun time. And again, it was one of the only companies that I remember where we actually, crazy enough, most of us were single, and we actually all did group vacations together. We did like a ski trip vacation to Lake Placid. We did a dude ranch vacation. These were like weekend getaways, and we really had a lot of fun. So we had a really close-knit group of people, the warehouse people, the telephone tech support people, the technicians, the order administration, accounting. The whole group really worked really well together and like a family. So they were fun days. They really were. And it was a fun time. I mean, it's probably I always tell people it was probably the most fun job I've ever had in my life was working for Atari, because it was the one job where I got to play video games for work, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, when we were repairing the equipment, it was many games. You know, we would look at the customer's report when they submitted a console, so it was an 800 for repair, and they would say, you know, the problem was works great except when I'm playing Galaxian, or works great except when I'm playing, Space Invaders, and they would tell you what the problem was, and so we would end up playing that game to try and find the exact problem. So it was a pretty fun time, and it was exciting because we were aware of what was going on with Apple and their machines, and Commodore and their machines. So it was always kind of a competitive thing going, where we were always kind of like rooting for Atari, and we felt we had a much more superior product as well. So I mean, with their arcade heritage, and I'm pretty sure that most of the LSIs that we were using in the 8-bit system were also using the arcade systems from Atari Arcade Division, which, by the way, was next door. So the Atari arcade machines were being repaired at a facility right next to us, and they had this really cool game room there with some of the latest Atari arcade stand-up machines, and we'd get to go over there and play them lunch break. You know, there would be like Kangaroo and Dig Dug and a lot of great games, Star Wars and whatever happened to be at the time. So it was a real fun time. I think back on it, and again, it was a great group of people. It was a fun technology. I just remember my friends coming over on weekends to play video games off the Atari 800, and they were just amazed at the graphic and sound quality, how close it was to the arcade games at the time. So it was really cool. I was thinking about one of the fun things that we or unique things that we came across while we were doing the repairs, and it was always kind of interesting. I remember one, it was like a mystery, and we were all of a sudden getting all of these Atari 800s in, and they all had the same problem with a broken spacebar or an inoperative spacebar, and it kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, we were repairing these things for over a year and really never had a problem with the keyboard, and all of a sudden we're starting to get this rash of defective 800s with spacebar problems. And under investigation, we found that the little micro switch was basically the solder joint at the board was being fractured. And so we started, asking the users, like, exactly what were you doing the last time before this thing broke? And come to find out, they had released an arcade translation of the game Defender.
Mm-hmm.
And the smart bomb was the spacebar. So in the heat of the gameplay, the users were pretty much slamming down pretty heavy on these space bars. and so we were going through keyboards left and right. And then we would have to tell the customers, you need to kind of lay off the space bar when you're playing Defender.
Nice.
Pretty funny. So,
it's hilarious. You said something before that made me curious. You said the machine works fine except when I'm playing Galaxian or except when I'm playing Space Invaders. Why would a machine only exhibit problems while playing Galaxian or something?
Yeah, basically what would happen is that specific game was using different registers in the graphic processors. As you know, the Atari 8-bit systems had custom graphic LSIs to that worked hand in hand with the CPU. In fact, it took a lot of the burden off of the CPU. So they would kind of timeshare, and it was basically the ANTIC and the GTIA that were basically responsible for the graphic display creation, whether it be sprites or the collision detection, font creation. So what would happen is under specific games, they might have been utilizing registers within the graphic chip that other games weren't using, and that's where the defect was. So we'd literally have to play that specific game. I mean, we had a test cartridge called Salt that worked really well as far as exercising a lot of the graphic functions of the system, but it was very basic, and sometimes it was the actual game that would trigger a specific problem. So we basically would use that we'd have a whole bank of games. We would use that game, and sure enough, most of the time the customer was right. We would find the problem using that specific game.
I have one.
You go. I think that might have been the last one created, or it may have been 2.60. I can't remember now. But that was it. That was the cartridge. That was the first thing we did was plug that in, and start diagnosing the problem. So it would run through. There was a little. You probably also have it. There's a little plug-in strip that goes into the front game ports, and that would work hand in hand. It would basically check all the connectivities within the game ports and like the Pokey chip. So
no, I was unaware of that. So it's like a strip that would plug into all 4 joystick ports at once?
Exactly. Yeah, there was actually, if I'm not mistaken, there was just one that actually had 4 ports on it, but it also would work with the 2-port machines as well. But it was basically a strip about that big. It was a little PC board with 4 joystick connectors on it, and you would just push it into the front of the 800 or the 400, plug in the salt cartridge, and let it run through. And then it would run through. It would check the potentiometer inputs for like the paddle controllers, check the trigger buttons. It pretty much ran through all the different connections on the 4 directions on each of the joysticks. So and if you forgot to put it in there, you would see it would start erroring out during the salt test for Pokey. You would see all the errors out on.
I've never heard of that. What was that gadget called?
I'm trying to remember now, but it was basically just it was like a loop. I think it was called a loop back board, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was just called a loop back board. I probably have one somewhere in my collection of because I still have a salt cartridge and the service manuals for a lot of the equipment in storage, and I probably have one. So if I can find one, I'll take a picture of it.
I would love that. I'd like to see that. Yeah. Also, it looks like you have a Atari Service Mug there down behind you.
Oh, I wanted to show this to you. I'm glad you remember about it. I dug this up. This is actually pretty cool, but it's actually an Atari Service Mug that we were giving to the authorized service companies that at one point, and it was kind of like as a perk, and it was kind of a cool mug. And somehow I ended up retaining one and have it for all these years. I'll have to show you. I also have some. I don't even the rubber racers on these things are pretty much like solid as a rock now, but they're Atari pencils. Same thing.
Awesome. Neat.
Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and then I actually shot. I was actually, and I'll try and scan some of these for you. But I was actually a support engineer for a commercial, Atari 8-bit computer commercial, that for some reason I've been looking on YouTube to try and find the exact commercial, and I haven't been successful. But while I was there setting up the equipment and during the shoot, I took some photographs, and it was basically a couple of actors, and they were doing like a typical family. But you might see some of they look pretty similar to a lot of the Atari 8-bit commercials that you saw at the time. But they basically set up like a library, and it was kind of cool. I'll just kind of quickly. This was an outdoor scene of some of the production staff setting up. They pretty much interestingly enough, they used an actual house in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. They kind of put some yellow tinting on the window. This is me a lot younger and with the beard.
Nice.
I was doing the setup. So basically, once we did the setup.
But I need more context on this. You working at Atari at this point, or was
yes, I was working at Atari and in New Jersey, and got called out. My manager just said, "Listen, they're doing a shoot nearby at a home. They need somebody there to set up the equipment and also off camera to trigger certain functions on the keyboard, because the staff the actors that were actually doing the acting weren't going to be pushing the buttons, so I would be doing it off to the side. So we had like a duplicate system set up. So it was kind of interesting. It was a one-day shoot. This little girl here in the little like red, white, and blue jersey, she was one of the actors in the actual commercial.
Was this a commercial or like a tutorial video or?
This was actually a TV commercial that was shown back around 1982, I guess it would be. There's the two actors reading their script, their lines. Yeah, this is almost where they're getting ready for the shoot. I want to have another picture. There's a cool picture of coming up here. There's a cool picture of the actor that was actually in it playing the dad. You can kind of see.
He looks all dad with his glasses and his Atari 400. Yeah.
So I think that's probably the coolest of all the shots here. But and then this is where they were doing actually just the product shoot here. They were just shooting. This is kind of you'll see this is like behind the camera, and then I'll show you. There's one. This is the front where they just kind of set up an 800 and a 400 with some of the software, the educational software behind it at the time. So it was kind of interesting. Here's another shot of the equipment setup, and then this was like the outdoor luncheon. And the gentleman and I'll point out, this gentleman was also an actor right here. He was also one of the actors in the commercial. So that I think they actually shot about 2 different takes of the commercials during that day. But it was actually a lot of fun. And again, I was trying to find the commercial on because there's quite a few of the Atari 8-bit commercials on YouTube. For some reason, this particular one that they shot that day, I haven't been able to locate so far. I'm just trying to find the actors that were in it, but pretty cool.
That is cool. If you could scan those, that would be awesome. I will. So I haven't seen them. I'm sure the listeners would like to see them.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, another thing I do besides doing the interviews is when I'm doing interviews, I ask people, okay, what do you have that the world hasn't seen? And we've got source code. He's like, oh yeah, I've got source code. Do you want it? And now it's available. And development notebooks I talked to the programmer who did the game Claim Jumper, and he's like, yeah, he gave me the source code, and then like he had this like development notebook of just like hundreds of pages of just like everything he was thinking about when he was making the game. Now it's scanned. So
very cool. Will do. When you said source code, you remind me of another funny story. I think it was like a Friday afternoon, and we got a call from Atari California, and my manager came in saying, you need to get the modem going, and they're going to download this file. And so, back then we were looking at 300 or maybe at tops a 1200 baud modem. So it would take forever to download just even a 4K file. But so we made the connection, and we're downloading this file. And I'm thinking maybe it's an upgraded version of Salt or something, and so we complete the download, and it's an exe file on a floppy basically, and we end up firing it up, and it was basically a beta copy of the Pac-Man cartridge. And so for some reason my manager had requested it, to give it a whirl so that we can kind of play and work through it and see how the gameplay was. And so for the next 2 hours, I think 4 or 5 of us were sitting around computers playing the beta copy of the Pac-Man cartridge from 800.
Nice.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty
Working.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. I think the one cartridge, I think the one game that we used to have these Friday night at my house. We used to have these Friday night get-togethers, and the one game that we always went back to was Star Raiders. I don't know what it was about that game, but me and a couple of my friends just got addicted to it, and we would just play that thing for hours, So again, very simplistic graphics, but it was the gameplay that just was so intriguing.
That's interesting. You guys worked at fixing computers all day, then you went home after work and.
That's very true. It's very true. You would think that by the time Friday afternoon came, the last thing we want to do would be touch another computer and play a game. But it's funny. I mean, the Atari computers were so advanced for the time, and they were not just besides being obviously one of the first home computers, they were at the time the most advanced game system that you can have in your home. They were really good, close arcade translations, or the closest arcade translations available for both sight and sound and gameplay at the time. So, so whenever a new game cartridge came out for the 8-bit, in fact, I was so into the 8-bit computer system that I had completely lost interest in the Atari 2600. I thought even though the gameplay was kind of cool, the graphics were so rudimentary and simplistic compared to the 8-bit that it was like no comparison. I just felt if you're going to play the game, you need to play it on an 8-bit computer system. So I basically have an 8-bit system still. It's packed away in an 800, and then I bought just after leaving Atari, believe it or not, I bought a 130 XE, and I remember there was a memory upgrade that doubled the memory from 130 to like 256, and I actually installed that in there, and I actually used that system for quite a few years before I actually eventually ended up caving in and buying a IBM PC compatible, mostly because I was using it at work. But I used the Atari quite a bit back then, up until probably like the early '90s. I was still using it and playing games, and it was kind of a cool system.
Yeah, it was. Tell me about other failure modes besides people smashing space bars. What other common problems did you see?
Some of the surprises, it's funny because some people would come in and they would treat this Atari machine like it was a brand new car or a piece of fine jewelry. I remember this one gentleman came in with his wife, and his wife was holding the computer, and she placed it on the counter, and she laid it down just a little bit too heavy for his liking, and he was complaining, you have to really take care of this machine. Don't drop it like that. And so it was always funny how certain people really kind of like took care of it. And then on the other extreme, we would get machines in for repair that looked pretty bad. I mean, they were kind of grungy, and there was always a few surprises when we would open them up, and if the friendly little cockroach would run out and kind of give you a scare. So we actually had to be careful about that. When we're opening some of these things, we'd have to kind of make sure that there wasn't any rodents running around that would get loose like cockroaches. And actually, that was what was causing some of the failure modes, because the debris left behind by the cockroaches is very acidic, and it would actually eat through the PC board traces. So we get the Coca-Cola spill on the keyboard that would eventually find its way into the system. Although the motherboards, the main boards, were protected pretty well by the casing, the RF shields on the early machines. The later ones weren't as liquid proof, and so if any like soft drink got in there and it wasn't like removed immediately, it would pretty much eat through the traces. So soft drink spills were pretty common. But the bug debris wasn't as common, thank God. But the soft drink spills were pretty common. I'm trying to think if there's any other unique failure modes besides. I remember the Defender keyboard was the one that stuck out in my mind the most. You'd get a few with broken keys. That they would come in and the person would say that their kid ripped the keys off the keyboard and or their dog got to it or their cat got to it. But trying to remember some of the more unique failure modes. I just remember the Defender. I remember certain failure modes with certain games, like whether it be Centipede or Galaxian, that would trigger it. And
I had a friend back in the day who was into playing. It was either decathlon or track and field, one of those games where you had to wiggle the joystick back and forth to make the guy run.
Right.
And he wanted to get the best score ever, so he took a belt sander to the joystick.
Oh.
Would just jiggle the sandpaper back and forth super fast. He said that the little man practically flew off the screen, and he got the best time ever in that game, but of course it destroyed his joystick.
I guess it's worth it sacrificing one joystick. Particularly
the amazing trick you can do one time.
Yeah. The good news is the Atari 800 series joysticks were relatively inexpensive compared to today's joysticks.
Right.
And then we speaking of joysticks, you reminded me of the Atari 5200 joystick, which was probably the least reliable joystick ever created, and probably the most inaccurate or least fun joystick to use. As unfortunately, most of the games of the day used digital sticks, arcade sticks, and the analog stick on the 5200 just didn't lend itself very well to games like Pac-Man. It was very frustrating. Besides the fact that it had the rubber shields would wear out, and obviously the button problem where it would oxidize and cause major problems. So we were kind of going through major repair cycles on those 5200 joysticks. Luckily, the 800 never had a problem like that. So the joysticks were pretty indestructible, actually. Considering they were made relatively inexpensively, those joysticks held up pretty well. I think the only thing we had to, you'd get your usual Space Invaders user that would basically try to, maneuver a little further to the left or further to the right than the game would allow, and they would end up snapping the plastic little fingers that were on the inside of the joystick on the 800 series joystick. So we would go through a replacement of a little the handle and it was like all in pieces, a handle and the 4 little touch pads that were clicking down on the cricket pads on the PC board inside the joystick. So we were replacing those quite frequently as well. But it was a pretty rugged little joystick for the money. You really couldn't beat it for the money.
So your title there when you were in Somerset was repair technician or something like that?
Yeah, when I started, I was basically a bench technician repairing the 800 line, which included the printers, the disk drives, the interface box, the modems, and the computers. And then after I can't remember how long I was there. It was probably about a year and a half to 2 years. I got promoted to a field service representative and for the Southwest Territory. So I basically moved from New Jersey out to Los Angeles. And I had Southern California from Fresno down, Nevada, primarily the Vegas area, all of Arizona, and that was my territory. And basically my job was to go to all the authorized the service centers and train them how to do their warranty paperwork, make sure they had all the latest service manuals, train them how to do repair if they needed any training, teach them on the new product as far as repair of the new product. So that's what I did for about the last year that I was with Atari, and would have still been doing that, except it was July of, I guess it was 1984 July, when Atari sold Water Communications, sold Atari to Jack Tramiel, and so pretty much that was a Friday of, I think it was like 4th of July weekend, if I'm not mistaken, and pretty much by Monday, everybody that was still there had received notice, except for small skeleton crew, that they were let go. I had received a call from Sunnyvale Engineering that they were looking to rehire me, but I'd have to move up to Sunnyvale, and I was considering that. the gentleman I was going to report to, I can't remember his name, but he said he was going to be going into meetings with Jack Tramiel, and then he was going to call me back and give me more details about the job position. And about 2 days went by and I didn't hear from him, and I gave him a call back. I think he was kind of like running the engineering team at the time. And he said that after the meeting with Jack Tramiel, he had changed his mind and decided not to stay on with Atari. And then based on his decision, I decided it was probably a good move for me to move on as well. I don't really know how it worked out, but I hadn't heard any really good things about working for Jack Tramiel at the time. So after the news from the gentleman that was looking to bring me on, after finding out that he wasn't going to stay on, I decided to do the same. So I kind of heard rumors that he had walked in and pretty much he asked them to put out the entire product lineup on display for review. And I heard rumor, I don't know if there was any truth to this, that he basically took all the game systems and threw them on the floor and said, we're no longer in the game market. So I just wasn't getting any good vibes. So.
So as field service representative, want to talk maybe a little more about that. Sounded like you traveled a lot, and any interesting stories or problems or anything that happened during that time?
I think the only problem I ever had was I had a company car that was a Chevy, I believe it was a Chevy Citation, which was a little 4-cylinder. And unfortunately, working in LA and having to cover Arizona, the trip across the desert was about an 8-hour trip, 6 to 8 hour trip. And it get pretty hot. And so I just remember the air conditioner in that car never working. So I had to take quite a bit of water with me to make it across the desert, And I learned to travel at night. After a while, I learned to make sure that I was traveling at night when it was cooler, because it was pretty hot out there. So, no, it was pretty interesting. I met a lot of really cool people back then. I mean, many of the authorized service centers back then were also Atari resellers. So they were basically dealers that were selling the Atari 8-bit line. I remember this one chain in Southern California. I'm trying to remember the name of it now, but they were like a really large, kind of like the Best Buy of today. And they were a pretty big Atari reseller or dealer for the 8-bit line. But for some reason, I cannot remember the name of that company now. But they had about 80 some odd stores in California. So, but yeah, they were.
I'm trying to think. I grew up down there. I'm trying to think of what it might have been.
Yeah, it might have been like Pacific Stereo. I don't remember now if it was them or not. But it was a company that was pretty much, located predominantly in California, predominantly in Southern California, and they had a really huge market share at the time. So, but yeah, it was kind of interesting meeting all the dealers that were basically selling the Atari 8-bit line at the time. They were really nice people. They were really, they knew the product really well. They were, as we were as employees of Atari, they were really into the product. They believed in the product. So it was really kind of a cool family. It was nice. It was nice being able to get out there and engage with, the dealers and the people that were repairing the product out in the field. So it was kind of cool. It was also kind of cool seeing the really quick evolution of the product. I mean, when I joined, the 8-bit product was probably out, I guess it was about a year to a year and a half in the marketplace. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was introduced in late 79 or early 80, and I joined them in late 81. And so, the 8-bit line, the first generation, the 400 and the 800, were out there about a year and a half to 2 years. And they were still rather expensive. I remember the 800 with 48K of memory was probably going for about $1,100 at the time, retail. And that's pretty steep, in today's dollars. So, but I remember the quick, from when I joined, within about a year, they had moved to the XL line, which obviously was a big move to get the cost down, because we were already competing with Commodore with their 64 and the VIC-20, and obviously with the Apple II. So the XL line came out. It was the 600 and the 800, and then there was a 1200 XL. Actually, the 1200 XL I think came first, but it was a bigger unit. It did come first. It was a bigger unit, and then the 800 and the 600 came out, and then and there was supposed to be, I think there was supposed to be a model with built-in disk drive. If I remember correctly, it was like the 1450 or something.
That's right. Good memory. 1450 XLD.
Yeah. But I don't know if it ever saw the light of day, because I'll be honest with you, I never saw one come in for a service. So
a couple hundred maybe were made,
okay.
And there are a few still out there. As I understand, there was the 1400 and then the 1450 XLD, which is the one that had the drives. And there's a few out there. They're highly sought after. And apparently a few of them were dumped at the Federated Group at the very end. There was a few that was owned by Atari, I think.
Okay.
And some lucky people got them at dirt cheap, but they were in the catalogs, but they were never really officially released.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yeah, and then I remember then the XE line came out, and just about the time when we were leaving. So. We're back, or just after the time we left. I can't remember exactly now. I just remember purchasing one just like right after I had left Atari in July. I remember purchasing one.
Did you get an employee discount? It sounded like maybe you were blowing all your paycheck on games for a while there.
No, it's funny. I didn't. I actually just was still. I was very much into the 8-bit line personally, and I wanted to get the XE because it had that cool mod to add the bank switched memory upgrade. So I upgraded it to 256, and I'm not sure why I actually upgraded it now, because obviously most of the games didn't require the use of much more of that RAM, but it might have been so that multiple games could have been loaded in simultaneously. I know at the time there were certain disk loaders that would allow you to load multiple games in and just kind of switch between one game and the other on the fly. So maybe that was the one reason why I actually wanted to go for the higher memory, because even the 128 K was more than you really needed for the Atari 8-bit line. I do remember, I don't know if you've heard of this, but I don't, with the 800, it was the only console with two cartridge slots, the left and the right. Excuse me, or the A side, the A and the B slot, and I don't think there were any cartridges released by Atari that utilized the right cartridge slot, but I do remember there was a piece of software that was really handy, and what it allowed you to do was you would be able to load the software from a disk drive, and you can put a cartridge in the left hand slot really quick. If you did it really quick, you'd end up pulling it in, pushing it in, pulling it out, and you can basically dump the cartridge to an exe file on the computer, which you then save on the floppy. So it allowed you to basically transfer your game cartridges to the floppy, which was very convenient, because with those little game menus, you can have like 6 or 8 games on one floppy disk, and you kind of switch back and forth real easily.
Did you ever get that to work, even once?
I did.
Really?
I actually did. In fact, I actually, I mean, I haven't looked at my life. I mean, I don't even know. Most of the games are on floppy. They have been loaded in so many years, and I never really took the time to transfer them to new disks, to new media. So most of them may not even load anymore. But I did succeed. It was kind of hit or miss, but usually if you tried within, say, 2 or 3 attempts, you would get one that would work, and you would get a good clean dump, and you'd be able to load it. It would work fine. So yeah, it worked really well, actually. It was a bit tricky, but it actually did its job. So
nice. Cool.
And I don't remember the name of the software or who put it out. And I'm sure kind of in many ways back then it was kind of frowned upon, because obviously people were copying them for more pirating than just, for me it was just to make it more easy, so I'd have to dig out the cartridge to play a game. I could basically put my cartridges away and then just play them off the floppy drive, which for me was a lot more convenient.
I'm sure there were multiple softwares that did about that same thing. I interviewed a guy who made one of them, and he said it was 90% of the time you put it in, the computer would crash, and once in a while you could actually get a dump.
Right, we would. I remember there was there was the different mods for the floppy drives, either to expand their capacity or to increase their speed or to allow them to play copies of the like backup copies of the disk. The one thing about floppies is the more you use them, the more chances that they're going to basically get damaged, especially with the 5 1/4 inch medium. It wasn't very resilient. And I remember the most popular modification for the 810 and the 1050 was the happy mods or the happy drives. And I modified. I have two 1050s, and I think both of them, at least one of them was modified, but maybe both of them was modified with the happy drive. And I don't remember 100%, but I remember it definitely increased the capacity. It wasn't like doubling the capacity, but it like created like an enhanced capacity, if I remember correctly. So, but we'd also run into problems with those as well, because customers would have their machines upgraded or modified, and then sometimes it was actually the happy chip that was blown out. So, if a customer sent it in for repair, we'd have to notify them that, their modified chip was the problem, and we'd have to revert it back to the standard ROM, and then they would have to go and basically maybe put a warranty claim in with Happy or buy a new mod. So, so that was kind of interesting. It was a cool time, and it was interesting because it was before computers were connected, and not many people actually even owned a modem or knew how to use one, or even use one to connect with like bulletin boards and such. So most people were using theirs in a standalone configuration, which is very different from what people use computers with today. I mean, most people are used to using a computer to access the internet, and for Skype and for email and for Facebook and for all the online capabilities. And it's kind of interesting how there's a whole culture, back in the early 80s that were using computers in a more, isolated, just one-on-one, application. So whether it was to, try and learn the basic programming language, or assembler language, or some of the different other languages that were available on the 8-bit, like Pascal, or just use it for a simplistic like word processing that was available, or some of the cool text adventure games, or again the arcade translations. It was kind of interesting how people, back then were so enamored with this new technology and how they used it. Very different from what people do today with computers. But back then, one thing I gotta say, that the graphics might have been very simplistic by today's standards, obviously, but the gameplay was still there. The gameplay and the excitement was all still there. So it's really cool. It was a fun time. It was really a fun time to be into computers. It was the early stages and the birth of computers. So, which I actually wanted to ask you a question. Did you happen to see that cable program last season, Halt and Catch Fire?
I haven't seen it yet. No.
It's actually pretty interesting. Not that it was really about Atari, but it was really more about the first, IBM clone. Mm-hmm. But obviously it mentions the works going on with Commodore and Apple. Didn't really mention much about Atari. But it was actually pretty fascinating. If you get a chance to see it, I recommend it, because it kind of shows you the early days of the home computer and some of the craziness that was going on in the industry. Nice. So, one other thing I thought was really interesting, and I just wanted to mention, is I really believe that the biggest disadvantage Atari had was that they were owned by the wrong company. And I remember early days hearing that Atari, when they were looking for finance, when Bushnell was out there, when he still owned the company, and he was looking for some finance, pretty much to get the 2600 out there produced and manufactured and out there Obviously he had the tie-in with Sears for their version of the game platform, but for the Atari game, he was really looking to get some investment. And I know he went to a lot of traditional electronic companies of the day, and pretty much kind of struck out, was turned down, and it was Warner Communications that basically stepped up to the plate. But I think the problem with Warner is I don't think they really knew how to manage Atari. Atari was a very different animal from what Warner was. Warner was involved in media, but they were more into movies and into music. And I don't really think they knew how to manage a computer company / game company. And I think there was a lot of management conflict, which I think was one of the reasons why Nolan had left. Actually, before I even joined Atari, he was no longer there. And I really think that was the early beginning of the end for Atari, because they lost. It's like Apple without Steve Jobs. He really did help bring them back from the abyss. And with some really cool technology. And I think they lost the creative mind of Nolan and his team to develop new products and new technology and keep them at the forefront. So I believe that if they would have found the right partner, I think the Atari's future would have been a lot different, and I think they probably still would have been around today as a force to be reckoned with. I think it was more that they just unfortunately did not find the right partner to bring them forward and allow them to continue their creativity.
Good thought.
So,
if you could send a message to the Atari computer users that still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
First, I want to thank them for supporting the Atari 8-bit product line all these years. I think it's awesome. I really do. I think it's just testament to what Atari had created back then, I thank them for keeping it alive. I really do, and just keep on playing. Keep on playing. It's great. Keep it up. It's good to hear. It's good to hear.
Great. Thank you so much, Lou.
All right. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.